Okay, good afternoon. Now we don't have a slide anymore. Thank you for coming to this 5 o'clock session. I know it's the last session of the whole day. Everyone's kind of falling asleep. Hopefully we can get through this with enough energy. So my name's Kathleen Yin. I am a co-founder for Serious Games Australia New Zealand, which is an association that tries to bring together people who are working in serious games from all paths of society, developers, researchers, marketers. We try to include them all. Today with me, we've got three very awesome international folks who traveled all the way here to Melbourne. Firstly, we have Attila, who is CEO of MMORSal from Switzerland, and he is instrumental in implementing project discovery in EVE Online. Next to him, we've got Mark Barlet, who had a talk right before this one. Some of you may have been there. Co-founder and CEO of Able Gamers, who did a lot of very, very valuable work promoting accessibility to players who are disabled. And then at the very end of the table, Matthew Lee from America, chair of the Serious Games Special Interest Group at the IGDA, and who's done a fair bit of work trying to bridge the gap between academia and developer in terms of serious games. So this year is the first time that Serious Games had a proper stream at GCAP. Some of you may have attended some of the previous talks by Imre. I had another panel earlier in the day. So most people here have heard today that games can be used for a lot of things other than just pure entertainment. We've got education, science, defense, health, and this audio bug. Let's just try to ignore that. And they can even be used for marketing and brand building by companies. So with all these external goals having to be taken into account, during design, these games are sometimes designed in a relatively different way and with relatively different goals compared to your standard commercial games. Now, the question that we're trying to address today is that what can serious games and commercial games learn from each other? And what are actually any fundamental differences between them, if there actually are any? So I'm going to get all these three awesome people to answer a question each, and then we'll have kind of a cross discussion where we'll talk with each other about some big questions. To start off, I just want to ask Attila. So you've worked with EVE Online, a massive commercial game to deliver two big citizen science projects. Could you please talk about the projects briefly and specifically how you've smoothly incorporated the science into EVE Online?
Thank you for the kind introduction. First of all, sorry if I may seem to be a little slow, but I flew in just 2 in the morning and I didn't manage to get a minute of sleep since then. So if somebody will fall asleep, that's me in this room. So we work in a very special field, which is citizen science. Citizen science is the involvement of the general public in the scientific research process, and oftentimes it manifests in the crowdsourcing of analysis of large scientific databases. Typically, we think about activities where the human cognitive skills have still an edge compared to machine learning, like pattern recognition or transcribing handwritten text, and so we started to work in this field, and what we saw that gamification, sometimes even standalone games, serious games were created around solving scientific microtasks, but the retention rate and engagement statistics were really sad, so to say. People like the idea, love science, but this is oftentimes super boring activity, very repetitive. And our take on this problem was that why don't we go to the AAA games who solve this problem? They managed to turn grinding into something that we enjoy. And so that's what we did. We went first to CCP, which is an Icelandic company. They're behind EVE Online, and they were very receptive to this idea. And we set up a collaboration between CCP, us, and the Human Protein Atlas. And we introduced microscopic images of human cells into EVE Online as an organic part of the game. It was part of the lore, part of the story, part of the reward system, and the game mechanics. and the results were quite amazing. So we got in little more than 1 year, we got 32 million classifications from players, which is huge in citizen science. And now we're working on the second iteration, which is analyzing light curves from stars in search for exoplanets. And we are over 150 million classifications, so it's really, really amazing. And I forget the question.
No, the question is you describe yourself and your achievements. So you did very well. All right, thank you, Attila. So Mark kind of comes to this from a different angle in that you are kind of promoting serious play rather than serious games. If you would like to talk a bit about the project that you have involved in this field where you changed either the UI of the game or the controls of the game to enable more serious play to happen.
Yeah, so for me, and unfortunately for the people that just walked with my talk, you're going to hear something again, which is just the importance of video games for people with disabilities and how disabilities has a tendency to be very limiting, not in just what the body can do, but in social spaces. We oftentimes treat people with disabilities in a very different way when oftentimes they don't want to be treated that way. And what I think is really important, and why I work really hard in video games, is because to me all video games are serious games, because it gives a person with disabilities that ability to do something and be something and have these shared experiences. Now, there are some great games that are classified as serious games that help with healthcare outcomes and things like that. But really, for me and from my perspective, the well-being, the mental health well-being that people who potentially are very isolated given where they live rurally or the nature of their disability, video games give them that opportunity to just do about anything. I did want to ask, I think what's really interesting about your project is that the science fits so well with the story of you that I thought that was, as I was listening to you talk, one of the coolest things was you did get a bunch of people to classify a bunch of stuff, but there was a reward program. But also, given the nature of the spaceships and everything like that, it's a perfectly valid task if you wrap the right story around it.
Okay, thank you. All right, and lastly, Matt, you've got a third and slightly different perspective. You are a registered nurse, you're an academic, both in nursing and games. You've worked on a lot of stuff. You've worked on Second Life many years ago, and you've been providing thought leadership as the chair of the Serious Games Special Interest Group at the IGBA. So I'm hoping you can comment on one of the biggest issues that players often see in serious games, especially for not-for-profit serious games. They're just not fun, and there's particularly not as fun as commercial games. What do you think is missing in these serious games, if anything?
Well, I think one of the main things that makes them not quite as fun is that most of them they're not designed necessarily to engage the player because they need to be marketed. They need to be marketed to a player. A lot of these non-commercial serious games, as other people who have worked on a lot of other serious games from universities such, now are usually funded by grants and such. The money comes up front. You don't need to worry about selling them or promoting them in advertising videos or giving them to Let's Players to comment on. So if you don't need to worry about that, a lot of time people start to concentrate on, okay, what is the information we need to convey, or what are we trying to do here? And a lot of the time the element of fun gets left out because people often think that games by themselves are inherently engaging, when that's not true. You have to design them to be engaging. That's the whole point of being a game designer. The problem comes when everyone thinks they're a game designer, and let's cut the designer out. Here's exactly what you want. No, we don't want to compromise, we just want this. And this usually leads to pretty bad outcomes because it's actually been shown that when games are not quite so fun and yet you force people to play them, engagement drops off, and even the cases where you make them play, the actual beneficial effects drop off by at least half, if not more.
I believe it's been shown in research that if you make games like a chore, you must play 1 hour a day. Actually, the benefit drops off significantly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Health-wise or education, yeah, it's gone.
Okay. Yes, question. Sorry. They tried to get rid of the buds by lifting up the stage. It became early, but obviously still here. Okay, we'll try to talk loud. Is this much better? This is, isn't it? Okay, sorry about that. Right, so the three of you, we talked quite a bit about balancing different things. So Matt talked about you can't compromise on certain things. Mark's specialty is trying to add in other options that allow people to engage. And also, Attila, you've been working with CCP in EVE Online, which is very financially successful. How do you guys usually balance the different priorities in your project? Because they are obviously the priorities of science, researchers, of the player, of commercialization, and of course, everyone has to eat, so your own financial needs has to come in as well. Can you describe briefly your experiences in balancing these contradictory priorities? Yeah, and you guys don't have to go in a sequential way. You can just talk whenever.
Yeah, but we still do. So reflecting a bit on what Matt was saying about how academia works is that really when they have the funding, then that's it. I mean, there is no other request for motivation for profitability of any kind. They have the funding, and after that, it's purely an administrative process to book man hours on that time, or I don't know what else. So that's a very interesting angle when you work on the other side in a very competitive industry like game development. The other thing is, I think but it's very important to understand the motivations. And for us, I don't have an academic background. I have an entrepreneurial background. And for me, it was very important to see that from the academia, publication is key. So there is a huge motivation to publish, to manage your impact score. I think that's impact factor. And so you have to take that into account. If you want to set up a successful collaboration, you have to provide these opportunities for the research team to be able to publish about the project. As for funding, it's a really hard part of the project. I remember very early in the process, I talked to Zooniverse, one of the founders of Zooniverse, Chris Lintott in Oxford, and I told him that I believe that we don't have a business model yet, but I believe we'll have to find one because we're generating value efficiently. And so he was saying that Zooniverse, and at that time Zooniverse was, I don't know, 10 years old. They're living off of grants, and for me as an entrepreneur, that was a terrifying, perspective. And we're actually doing that. So now we're working with the Horizon 2020 European Union project. We won a nice grant. That's what's helping us. We still didn't manage to solve this equation. I don't even know what grants are.
So does there need to be a change in the way these things are funded? I mean, it sounds like once you get a grant, you just build it and hope for the best. But I mean, how do you publish, or how do you get something that's worth real data like you did with the EVE project if you're not a designer and you don't create something fun? Doesn't that kind of skew whatever comes out of that research?
No, it does, certainly. And it can be very difficult because a lot of the time grants don't provide necessarily for, say, a marketing division if you actually need to get data from people who are not just undergraduates at the university, which is what so many do. It's like, let me get some information. We need people to play this game. Let me post up something information on a board in the university because undergrads are who I can get. Not the most diverse player population, I'm afraid.
There's Twitter.
Yeah.
You have to post on the uni's official Twitter using the official handle, otherwise HR will come after you.
Yeah.
This is so strange to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's one very positive thing when working with the academia, is that they don't have this kind of motivation. So usually they let you work with the IP freely.
Mm-hmm.
problem is that in serious games, the IP is not so strong at the end of the process that you can build an enterprise on it or a business model on it.
And that's if you're using someone else's IP. I mean, depending on the size of the university, you have creative teams that you could probably bring from, the design school or something like that, and just create your own IP. Everything got created from something, except Star Wars. It's been around forever.
And also, from my understanding, a lot of IP in Australian universities is sliced. Some examples I know of are that the university owns 1/3 of the IP, and then the department owns another third, and the last third is split separately between the inventors, so your team of 4 to 5 people. So if you wish to do anything with the IP, it becomes a bit of a legal nightmare to do anything.
That's common in the U.S. as well.
Yeah. Though the percentage where 30% gets split, it can be generous sometimes.
Well, I believe it depends upon institution laws as well. Yeah.
There's actually a fight at the University of Delaware. Something successful came, and they require 50% to go to the college, and like the other people are like, well, then never mind. We'll just let it die.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think one thing that you guys haven't, Mark probably doesn't have to answer this because you are a not-for-profit charity. And so, yeah, how to balance out research interests and game commercialization and your own financial needs. So, are there any tips that you guys can give?
In terms of balancing out game commercialization and research interests and commercial needs, I think it really depends on the people you're collaborating with. A lot of the time, when you're a small studio and you are consulting with the university or another client for a serious game on a contract, unfortunately, even if you don't want to go with some negative, even if you don't want to make certain design decisions, at the end of the day, because they control the money, if you want to get paid, they have final say, which can result in some fairly negative outcomes. There are stories I could tell you about working with the American Nurses Association and making a game for IE6 after they specifically said, oh, we need a game that can run on all these newfangled platforms, and yet their demo computer doesn't support any of that, but that's a whole other thing. But at the end of the day, your studio does need to get paid, or you need to get paid, because if you don't, you're not in a position to make anything. Bottom line there. You can't be starving if you actually want to make change for the industry.
Well, what would be the motivation for a university or something like that to not want to pay this talent? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is if it's one of these you must publish things and things like that. I mean, creating engaging experiences so that you can get the data that you're looking for is really important. And you can't. I know for a fact you can't write a paper off of 4 people playing your game for 4 hours. You just don't have a statistically significant amount of data. So, what's the balancing act? I mean, I just don't understand why the university would be like, well, let's cut that, when really ultimately the ability to kind of get people to engage is what's going to give you the data for whatever it is you're trying to come up with.
Because there are different levels there are different ways you can come up with that engagement, different levels of who you can pay and whatnot. You might not necessarily need to bring in an outsider if you can just pay a few students a couple $1,000 as opposed to a studio $20,000. Oftentimes, if they do need to cut something in the budget, it's like, a game designer and a whole professional studio is going to cost us $25,000 or more to build out this little prototype. We might not have that in the budget. We might want it for someone to do statistical support for us, which is also another complicated and necessary part of a project. So let's pay some students. Because at the end of the day, if it's a project they're not planning on selling, they're not planning on supporting past the lifetime of the short study, for them it's not worth it. And they'll just be like, okay, let's get some support. Let's just get this made. Let's get some students to play it. And once we get 100 or so people, that's good. It doesn't matter exactly who they are. It's unfortunate.
And I believe it's also a matter of lots of academics, unfortunately, don't fully understand the priorities when it comes to game design. So they believe that they can safely cut away some budgets in terms of game design, but they'll put away $20,000 for administration because a lot of universities know how much admin costs and they're willing to put that aside. But game design being such a new thing, some people don't fully understand it just yet, how important it is to actually put that in your budget as well.
Mm-hmm. What we have learned with our project is that citizen science in itself is kind of a hot topic in outreach, and what we did in together with video games was a sort of a perfect setting. And I think almost all grants in Europe requires you to do outreach and dissemination. So it's a nice add-on to these projects.
So we've talked quite a bit about what the difference is between funding models for commercial games and serious games. What else do you guys think are things that the serious games sector can learn from commercial games, or vice versa?
Well, I think by definition, serious games learn a lot from the game industry, because that's the definition of serious games, that we take ideas and approaches and design principles from the game industry and apply it in a serious context. What I see on the other direction is not necessarily what they could learn in terms of game design, because they're really living on the bleeding edge in technology and game design and innovation, but rather by embracing serious topics, they can create an extra layer of motivation, an extra layer of empowerment in games. And that's something I see more and more in AAA titles. And you know, with serious games and with serious topics, we're shooting for impact, and impact greatly depends on numbers. How many people are we able to reach? And I'm pretty sure that if we take a AAA title that can reach millions or potentially tens of millions of people, even if that serious content is just a small fraction of the 80 or 200 hours of gameplay, the impact is by magnitudes higher than a serious game who is focusing on that certain topic.
Like hiding the serious aspects of a game in a larger title. Like, I just read something where researchers were able to tell if someone was suffering from clinical depression based on certain play styles that were built into a AAA title, and there were these just like little indicators that, you know, they didn't really do anything other than to kind of show the proof of concept, but they were able to say, like, based on the way this person is playing, they potentially should be seeking some help for certain issues. But it was just kind of folded into the cookie of a AAA title.
I wouldn't call it hiding it per se, as much as weaving it into the game, making it just part of what the game is. I mean, very much like what Attila has done with Project Discovery and EVE Online. If you wrap that mechanic up with story, you put it into the setting, you make it a part of the setting, and you make it interesting, people will engage with it. I mean, if we can make a mechanic like grinding interesting, you can make all sorts of things interesting as long as you make them fit.
Yeah, it's really interesting with EVE Online that although we put a lot of energy into communicating what the project is about, and we always gave talks at player meetings at FanFest in Reykjavik or at EVE Vegas, and researchers came and we talked about the biology behind and then the exoplanet research behind. The lead researcher got an avatar in game. With the second project, we convinced Michel Mayor to be the face of the project. Now, Michel Mayor is the guy who discovered the first exoplanet, so he's like the biggest name in the research. His name comes up every year to get the Nobel Prize for this achievement. And he came to FanFest and he talked 1 hour during 1 hour about his research. And as the creative director of CCP put it, he out-nerded EVE players, which was the ultimate compliment. It's still really interesting to think about that. I'm sure that there are players who are not aware that this is real life content. I'm pretty sure that there are players who just see it as a new feature and they play with it.
So maybe what I'm hearing, I mean, what your success is pretty incredible. Maybe game developers out there should maybe reach out to universities and say, hey, we're potentially interested in a collaborative partnership. Do you have some research that we can, because really, I mean, I'm thinking about it, you had there was a story wrapped around your science, you know, here are these things we want classified, and your game dev people kind of built a quest around it so that it became part of the story. Maybe the flip is that, game developers out there should be making partnerships back to their universities saying, hey, what do you guys need so that we can potentially integrate it in and kind of repeat this model that you guys did, and instead of having to have a grant to create a crappy game, use the grant to take people out to dinner and have a discussion about what's needed. Let's make that happen. Let's do it.
Nice.
Well, actually, we're working on that. So that's sort of our company is we try to bring these two sides together to the same table. Also, we created a middleware for it to connect science and research. And actually, we're working on a next project with Gearbox. They're again super big. So if we manage to pull off something that's going to be huge. What was interesting, I met a couple of weeks ago with one of the Zooniverse founders again. Zooniverse is the biggest classic web-based citizen science platform. And what we're discussing is that we can scale vertically easily because how you build it into a game basically can change the engagement level or activity. So we can get to these amazing numbers of tens of millions of classification, but scaling up horizontally is almost impossible. So this collaboration with Gearbox started 4 years ago, when Project Discovery is not even out. I met with Randy Pitchford, who is the president and founder of Gearbox at GDC, and he said that this is great, let's do it. And ever since, we're working on this. So and that's the only two projects that I can talk about. So whereas in Zooniverse, you go to the platform as a researcher, create your project, and it's out in 1 week. So that's an interesting problem.
So I just want to go back to earlier we talked about how a lot of serious games and commercial games, they probably should be put together. So I've got essentially a question that came up in between my last panel and this one. So in the last panel, one of my panelists said he got into serious games because he wanted to change the world. He wanted to make a difference. And I guess the thing is, if, for example, if I were a biochemist and I made a game, not with you guys or with EVE Online, and I just made a game about classification and I made it really fun, that would still be serious games, wouldn't it? And the idea is, so instead of sitting here and talking about we should go to academics and find different funding models, do you think it's worthwhile for us as game developers to actually go out and promote the craft and break down the walls we've built and actually get more people who are not game devs to become game devs?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think everyone has a story to tell and might not necessarily have the skill to properly tell that story. And I think if you, to that very point, if there were these opportunities for collaboration, you would find that, you in fact have a story to tell and you have a way to tell the story. And that could happen.
I think some of that needs to go back to how we teach people about games too, and how we teach people about making games. Because early on during the game development process and the game education process, we really focus on teaching people to be game designers, sometimes game producers, game programmers, game artists. We don't talk about all the other roles that are important for games that much of the time. Like if you're talking about big online games, hey, you might need an economist to balance that out. You might need network engineers to make sure that works properly. You might need historians if you're working on a game that requires history to make sure stuff is accurate in terms of that, or a biologist or involving any of those things. We don't really partner with other people from the university when we're in the education space, and I think that's a really big missed opportunity. Because if we brought up those collaborations early on during education, we'd be able to have people think about, oh, maybe we could go talk to these other really interesting people who have interesting ideas for games later on. We're not setting a proper foundation, and so when we build these walls,
Yeah, but I mean that happens sometimes. So
Yeah.
like if you take Assassin's Creed, which is a really big classical or leisure game, video game, there is a position which is chief historian.
Yes.
And the chief historian is working for them, and
Mhm.
actually he's the guy who is managing the educational version of Assassin's Creed, which is, I think, again a beautiful way to utilize what we have as assets in video games in the serious scene or serious context.
And I would love to see a study done about that and how useful it is to help people remember for a test for Egypt or whatnot. Because I think there's some serious potential there. Because Assassin's Creed gets into so many more people's hands than, say, a standard educational game.
Pyramid quest.
And also, I personally don't believe you, as a game dev, you have to make serious games or into the serious game field to make a great contribution to the field. For example, if you're very interested in something, for example, history or archaeology, and you make a profitable commercial game that goes really deep into history and archaeology, do you guys think that would still considered as a game with serious intent?
If it's factual, then it is. I mean, I love economic games, and I oftentimes, will play some of the really good tycoon sims that are not just like, the online, but some of the more in-depth stuff, and, where there's real economic costs and benefits to it. And, I've learned how to be better with my money, honestly, based on, really great railroad sims and stuff like that, where I'm now making investment decisions for my family because I've understood the mechanics of the market and things like that. So, the game is a lot of fun. It's a blast, but I learned something. So I think to that point, if you're building something and it's historically accurate and you actually learn something, that's a benefit.
I think sometimes even if there are some historical inaccuracies, as long as it's something that's engaging and that's something that can provide a platform for tangential learning, when you get people interested enough to look up stuff themselves, that's a major achievement in itself. I grew up playing a lot of real-time strategy games, including Age of Empires, Age of Kings, Age of Mythology. Not 100% accurate, obviously, but there was a lot of information there in terms of, hey, these units do this. What the hell is this technology? And I started looking things up, and like, hey, this is actually really interesting stuff. And one of the biggest problems we have with education sometimes is getting kids, getting people interested in learning, and providing the information that there's information everywhere. Like, we can provide information to a variety of ways, but getting people interested, engaged, like, if we like, that's one of the biggest problems we need to overcome. If games can do that, but through that are not just branded as serious games, I'm all for that.
Because tangential learning really is the holy grail of serious games. Because it doesn't matter how much code you write, how much content you provide. There will be a day when your player leaves the game, but you still want them to be interested in that sphere. I mean, I think Attila has a lot of experience working with EVE Online, where there was massive online community interaction, people coming up with guides and nursery rhymes about how to solve Project Discovery.
Yeah, and so the first time we visited EVE FemFest, which is an annual event where roughly 3,000-4,000 players from all around the world together in Reykjavik, and there are 3 or 4 days of meeting with the devs, and there are presentations about the upcoming features, and there are player presentations as well. And so when we started to work on this project, we went there for the first time. It was kind of a surreal experience, and so we sat into one of the player presentations, which was about how you dissolve a corporation in EVE. And in EVE, corporations are the like guilds in other games. It's the unit of players working together. And there was a guy talking during 1 hour about if you're the leader of a corporation, what you should do in case you want to end the corporation. And we're sitting there, and with my partner, we're saying, yeah, that's what you do in real life if you have a corporation and you want to end it.
File for bankruptcy.
It was, all the communication problems, or how you split up assets and things like that. So it's fascinating to see how these in-game talents can be transformed into something which works in real life easily.
That explains why I never really liked playing Eve, because it's too much like real life. I don't think that's
You're opening up a big can of worms here.
I don't think that's the case as much as it was. I mean, I'm old, and I had a Commodore 64, and I had an Atari, and I was the first person on my block to have a Nintendo. 10 years ago, there was a lot of pushback. You know, I'll just tell you a story. I was working with a parent who had a child with Down syndrome, and she's like, I just want my kid to be able to do everything that other kids do. And I said, great, let's play some video games. She goes, no, I want my kid to canoe and ride a bike. And I'm like, do you not know what kids are doing today? I think I say that to say that the people that have the thought process that you brought are aging out. And, I'm in my 40s, and I could easily have a kid if I were really working at it that had just turned 20. And I'm a gamer, and my kid would be a gamer, and if my kid wanted to turn to gaming for learning or anything like that, I would have no problem with it. So I think what you said is accurate, but it's less accurate every day. When the average age of a gamer now is 37 years old, there are more gamers over 50 than there are under 18 statistically. Think that through. There's 21% over 50 and only 18% under 18. So I think that you're right, but you're not right much longer.
Yep. Is that another question? Can I contribute? Cite them really good games that you think fit their bill, because if you look hard enough,
I was going to say make them a gamer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you look hard enough, you will find good games out there that goes into every single discipline: health, history, education, defense, whatever. Find good ones which are, great design, very engaging, not addictive, tick all their boxes. It can be for profit, it can be not for profit, and just show them. And when I say show them, not show them a list, but show them screenshots, videos, let's plays, and show them to the parent or the caretaker or whoever, and say, this is the level that game development has reached, and this is the kind of stuff they can produce. So we're no longer just playing Sonic and Snake, and just show them. The thing was that a lot of them you cite statistics, people go, oh, that's statistics. You need to show them something a bit more tangible, something they can relate to and go, okay, if I play that, I will learn a lot about subject X.
And use board games as an analog as well. A lot of the people that would kind of hold those things are probably people that have played board games in the past. And you can learn Monopoly teaches you true economics. Chutes and Ladders, Sorry teaches you how to be a butthole. So what you can do is you can run that parallel that says, well, wait a second, there is in fact an analog in your space. This is just that next analog.
Just to reflect on that. So one example that I like very much is Dragon Age Inquisition, and I learned about that game because I was at a conference about video games culture, which was presentation of scientific papers written by people in sciences. They were not IT people or not game developers. They were historians and social scientists. And so they were talking about Dragon Age Inquisition, the romantic relationships in the game, and it was so interesting that I actually played with the game. And I think we can agree that it's not a serious game. It's a classic fantasy themed video game with dwarves, dragons, elves, and elves are real horrible. Yeah. And so what's really interesting is that in this game there are romantic relationships and homosexual romantic relationships as well. And there are helper characters. And with these helper characters you can go on missions, and there is one mage who is a homosexual male mage in the game. And there is a small side quest that you can take, where you visit a place where he meets his father, and he gets in a dispute with his father that he never accepted his homosexuality, and that's why they have this tension. And you're there, and it's a quest, but of course, I think they touch the subject very in a very sensitive way, so it's not like something that you have to actually solve, but you're there for a friend, to comfort a friend in a hard situation. And this is really like just a very, very small part of an 80 or 100 hour of gameplay. It's like 1 minute. But I think the impact of, of how people will think about homosexuality after playing this game is huge.
The empathy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that I'll say that I know a lot of game developers, and they're especially for like perpetual or games that have much more leg to them, they're desperate for additional content. And if someone is coming to them with a potential story to tell, and again, this is where I go back to the storytelling. I mean, if you are a refugee organization, you have a story to tell, and I need stories to tell to keep you to pay the monthly bill or to whatever, we have something mutually agreeable.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a AAA game company. There are plenty of small indie companies out there who are looking for different angles on like a lot of the conventional approaches. Like if you remember This War of Mine by 11-Bit Studios, and how they totally they twisted how like you'd portray war in video games from you're the point of view of the super soldier, the elite soldier, the squad, to you're someone just trying to survive, a civilian. I think there's a lot of potential for that sort of stuff in there.
Well, I can speak from the experience of the last years, because that's what we want to do. On one side, we build up a portfolio of research topics where there's a big enough database that needs to be analyzed, and it's super hard. And why we were successful already with these two projects was because we didn't have a fixed agenda. So we're not going to a game company that, hey, I want to put a topic about refugee crisis in your game, but I want to understand your game, and then I'll propose you a couple of projects, and let's see what fits best. And that's even with this approach, it takes years and years to set up a project.
We've just got 4 minutes, so the lady at the back, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to come and talk to us afterwards. Yep. Location-based entertainment as in Pokemon Go style? I think Matt has a fair bit of experience working for museums.
I mean, I think there's a lot of location-based entertainment for serious games as it is. A lot of like museums are one of the largest clients for serious games and other content at this point. They're always looking for new ways to draw people in, always looking for new content, ways to engage younger crowds, and games and digital displays are one of the big ways they're doing that.
The interactivity. I worked on a project at the Boston Science Center where they were doing the human body, and they were building a lot of games where they wanted like kids to walk this path, and they were at the end of the path. They had a screen that showed them what their gait, the size of their gait, and how they compared to other people, and the whole 9 yards. And they were basically gamifying in the museum all of these different ways of movement, because the whole concept was the moving body. And I was actually there because they were trying to make sure that people with disabilities who might not have great moving bodies were also included.
Or the Philadelphia Museum of Art is trying to come up with different ways where you can explore the different ways people to explore the art collection, really memorialize and personalize each different visit. So how can you turn that into a game? Can you attach different sound experiences to it? Can you link it up with different artifacts and other relics from that time period to make it a more immersive experience? So.
All right, thank you to everyone for coming. Tomorrow at GCAP, the Serious Games stream is still going. We still have a lot more talks tomorrow. You're welcome to attend them. I think today we've heard 3 different views on this kind of state of serious game that is globally, and I think we've come to a conclusion that even though previously serious games was considered a part where it's very exclusive, you just did government or academic jobs, now it's becoming more and more widespread, and that good game design is essential for both commercial and serious games. And if you want to do a good project, you kind of have to make a good game as a good starting point. Thank you everybody for coming. I believe this is the end of today's GDC, and I believe there's GCAP, sorry. And
You can go to sleep now.
yeah, we're all very tired. I'm sorry. I'm sure you're as well. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you guys tomorrow, I guess.